Hey, I don't have a lot of spoons, but here's something that I can do. Read along with me. We're going to be reading Revolutionary Intercommunalism and the Right of Nations to Self-Determination by Huey P. Newton, Vladimir Lenin, edited and introduced by Amy Godala. The introduction is wonderful. Please read it. The link to this is on my Linktree, which is in my bio. I'm going to start with Intercommunalism. In early February 1971, a group of social theorists met at Yale. They sat around a huge mahogany table in the library of Trumbull College. 14 students. Please don't kill me for pronunciation. Alan Beller, Samuel Cooper, John Cole, William Horowitz, Sandra Hughes, Carolyn Jackson, Vera Jones, Anne Linden, Jennifer Lyman, Donald Mendelsohn, Wayne Nevu, Dwight Rayford, Kurt Schmoke, and Bradley Wong. 2 academic sociologists in the role of moderators, an elderly psychoanalytic theorist, Eric H. Erickson, and Huey P. Newton, Supreme Commander of the Black Panther Party. One of the moderators recorded. An equal number of onlookers formed another circle outside them, behind Newton, a half-ring of comrades and travel companions, and behind Erickson, in awkward symmetry, a half-ring of Yale people. Without any conscious intent, the stage had been set for a confrontation. Confrontation was the keynote of the time. This was the season of shootings at Jackson State and Kent State universities and of the Panther trials. The dialogue began with a statement from Newton. I'll start the discussion by explaining the Black Panther Party's ideology. We believe that everything is in a constant state of change, so we employ a framework of thinking that can put us in touch with the process of change. That is, we believe the conclusions will always change, but the fundamentals of method by which we arrive at our conclusions will remain constant. Our ideology, therefore, is the most important part of our thinking. There are many different ideologies or schools of thought, and all of them start with an a priori set of assumptions. This is because mankind is still limited in its knowledge and finds it hard, at this historical stage, to talk about the very beginning of things and the very end of things without starting from premises that cannot be proved. That is true of both general schools of thought, the idealist and the materialist. The idealists base their thinking on certain presumptions about things of which they have very little knowledge. The materialists like to believe that they are very much in contact with reality or the real material world, disregarding the fact that they only assume there is a material world. The Black Panther Party has chosen materialist assumptions on which to ground its ideology. This is a purely arbitrary choice. Idealism might be the real happening. We may not be here at all. We don't know whether we are in Connecticut or in San Francisco, whether we are dreaming and in a dream state, or whether we are awake and in a dream state. Perhaps we are just somewhere in a void. We simply can't be sure. But because the members of the Black Panther Party are materialists, we believe that someday scientists will be able to deliver the information that will give us not only the evidence, but the proof that there is a material world, and that its genesis was material, motion, and matter, not spiritual. Until that time, however, and for the purpose of this discussion, I merely ask that we agree on the stipulation that a material world exists and develops externally and independently of us all. With this stipulation, we have the foundation for an intelligent dialogue. We assume that there is a material world and that it exists and develops independently of us, and we assume that the human organism, through its sensory system, has the ability to observe and analyze the material world. Now, the dialectical materialist believes that everything in existence has fundamental internal contradictions. For example, the African gods south of Sahara always had at least 2 heads, one for evil and one for good. Now people create God in their own image, but they think he, for God is always a he in patriarchal societies, what he is like or should be. So the African said, in effect, I am both good and evil. Good and evil are the 2 parts of the thing that is me. This is an example of an internal contradiction. Western societies, though, split up good and evil, placing God up in heaven and the devil down in hell. Good and evil fight for control over people in Western religions, but they are 2 entirely different entities. This is an example of an external contradiction. This struggle of mutually exclusive opposing tendencies within everything that exists explains the observable fact that all things have motion and are in a constant state of transformation.
Things transform themselves because while one tendency or force is more dominating than another, change is nonetheless a constant, and at some point the balance will alter and there will be a new qualitative development. New properties will come into existence, qualities that did not altogether exist before. Such qualities cannot be analyzed without understanding the forces struggling within the object in the first place, yet the limitations and determinations of these new qualities are not defined by the forces that created them.
Class conflict develops by the same principles that govern all other phenomena in the material world. In contemporary society, a class that owns property dominates a class that does not own property. There is a class of workers and a class of owners, and because there exists a basic contradiction in the interests of those two classes, they are constantly struggling with one another. Now, because things do not stay the same, we can be sure of one thing. The owner will not stay the owner, and the people who are dominated will not stay dominated. We do not know exactly how this will happen, but after we analyze all of the other elements of the situation, we can make a few predictions. We can be sure that if we increase the intensity of the struggle, we will reach a point where the equilibrium of forces will change, and there will be a qualitative leap into a new situation with a new social equilibrium. I say leap because we know from our experience of the physical world that when transformations of this kind occur, they do so with great force. These principles of dialectical development do not represent an iron law that can be applied mechanically to the social process. There are exceptions to these laws of development and transformation, which is why, as dialectical materialists, we emphasize that we must analyze each of the conditions separately and make concrete analysis of concrete conditions in each instance. One cannot always predict the outcome, but one can, for the most part, gain enough insight to manage the process. The dialectical method is essentially an ideology, yet we believe that it is superior to other ideologies because it puts us more in contact with what we believe to be the real world. It increases our ability to deal with what world and shape its development and change. You could easily say, well, this method may be successfully applied in one particular instance, but how do you know that it is an infallible guide in all cases? The answer is that we don't know. We don't say all cases or infallible guide because we try not to speak in such absolute and inclusive terms. We only have to say that we have to analyze each instance, that we have found this method the best available in the course of our analysis, and that we think the method will continue to prove itself in the future. We sometimes have a problem because people do not understand the ideology that Marx and Engels begin to develop. People say, you claim to be Marxist, but did you know that Marx was a racist? We say, well, he probably was a racist. He made a statement once about the marriage of a white woman and a black man, and he called the black man a gorilla or something like that. The Marxists claimed that he was only kidding and that the statement shows Marx's closeness to the man, but of course that is nonsense. So it does seem that Marx was racist. Now, if you are a Marxist, then Marxist racism affects your own judgment because a Marxist is someone who worships Marx and the thought of Marx. Remember, though, that Marx himself said, I am not a Marxist. Such Marxists cherish the conclusions which Marx arrived at through his method, but they throw away the method itself, leaving themselves in a totally static posture. That is why most Marxists really are historical materialists. They look to the past to get answers for the future, and that does not work. If you are a dialectical materialist, however, Marxist racism does not matter. You do not believe in the conclusions of one person, but in the validity of a mode of thought. And we in the party, as dialectical materialists, recognize Karl Marx as one of the great contributors to that mode of thought. Whether or not Marx was a racist is irrelevant and immaterial to whether or not the system of thinking he helped develop delivers truths about processes in the material world. And this is true in all disciplines. In every discipline, you find people who have distorted visions and are at a low state of consciousness who nonetheless have flashes of insight and produce ideas worth considering. For instance, John B. Watson once stated that his favorite pastime was hunting and hanging N-word, yet he made great forward strides in the analyses and investigation of conditioned responses. Now that I've said a word about ideology of the party, I'm going to describe the history of the party and how we have changed our understanding of the world. When we started in October 1966, we were what one would call black nationalists. We realized the contradictions in society, the pressure on black people in particular, and we saw that most people in the past had solved some of their problems by forming into nations. We therefore argued that it was rational and logical for us to believe that our sufferings as a people would end when we established a nation of our own, composed of our own people. But after a while we saw that something was wrong with this resolution of the problem. In the past, nationhood was a fairly easy thing to accomplish. If we look around now, though, we see the world, the land space, the livable parts as we know them, is pretty well settled. So we realized that to create a new nation, we would have to become a dominant faction in this one. And yet the fact that we did not have power was the contradiction that drove us to seek nationhood in the first place. It is an endless circle, you see, to achieve nationhood. We needed to become a dominant force, but to become a dominant force, we needed to be a nation. So we made a further analysis and found that in order for us to be a dominant force, we would at least have to be great in number. So we developed from just plain nationalists or separatist nationalists into revolutionary nationalists. We said that we joined with all of the other people in the world struggling for decolonization and nationhood, and called ourselves a dispersed colony because we did not have the geographical concentration that other so-called colonies had. But we did have black communities throughout the country. San Francisco, Los Angeles, New Haven, and there are many similarities between these communities and the traditional kind of colony. We also thought if we allied with those other colonies, we would have a greater number, a greater chance, a greater force, and that is what we needed, of course, because only force kept us a colonized people. We saw that it was not only beneficial for us to be revolutionary nationalists, but to express our solidarity with those friends who suffered many of the same kind of pressures we suffered. Therefore, we changed our self-definitions. We said that we are not only revolutionary nationalists, that is, nationalists who want revolutionary changes in everything, including the economic system the oppressor inflicts upon us, but we are also individuals deeply concerned with the other people of the world and their desires for revolution. In order to show this solidarity, we decided to call ourselves internationalists. Originally, as I said, we assumed that people could solve a number of their problems by becoming nations, but this conclusion showed our lack of understanding of the world's dialectical development. Our mistake was to assume the conditions under which people had become nations in the past still existed. To be a nation, one must satisfy certain essential conditions, and if these things do not exist or cannot be created, then it is not possible to be a nation. In the past, nation-states were usually inhabited by people of a certain ethnic and religious background. They were divided from other people either by a partition of water or a great unoccupied land space. This natural partition gave the nation's dominant class, and the people generally, a certain amount of control over the kinds of political, economic, and social institutions they established. It gave them a certain control over their destiny and their territory. They were secure at least to the extent that they would not be attacked or violated by another nation 10,000 miles away, simply because the means to transport troops that far did not exist. This situation, however, could not last. Technology developed until there was a definite qualitative transformation in the relationships within and between nations. We know that you cannot change a part of the whole without changing the whole and vice versa. As technology developed, there was an increase in military capabilities and means of travel and communication. Nations began to control other territories distant from their own. Usually, they controlled these other lands by sending administrators and settlers, who would extract labor from the people or resources from the earth, or both. This is the phenomenon we call colonialism. The settlers' control over the seized land and people grew to such an extent that it wasn't even necessary for the settler to be present to maintain the system. He went back home. The people were so integrated with the aggressor that their land didn't look like a colony any longer. But because their land didn't look like a free state either, some theorists started to call these lands neocolonies. Arguments about the precise definition of these entities developed. Are they colonies or not? If they aren't, what are they? The theorists knew that something had happened, but they did not know what it was. Using the dialectical materialist method, we, in the Black Panther Party, saw that the United States was no longer a nation, it was something else. It was more than a nation. It had not only expanded its territorial boundaries, but it expanded all of its controls as well. We called it an empire. Now, at one time, the world had an empire in which the conditions of rule were different, the Roman Empire.
The difference between Roman and the American empires is that other nations were able to exist external to and independent of the Roman Empire because their means of exploration, conquest, and control were all relatively limited. But when we say empire today, we mean precisely what we say. An empire is a nation-state that has transformed itself into a power controlling all lands and people. We believe that there are no more colonies or neo-colonies. If a people is colonized, it must be possible for them to decolonize and become what they formerly were. But what happens when the raw materials are extracted and labor is exploited within a territory dispersed over the entire globe? When the riches of the whole earth are depleted and used to feed a gigantic industrial machine in the imperialist home? Then, the people and the economy are so integrated into the imperialist empire that it's impossible to decolonize, to return to the former conditions of existence. If colonies cannot decolonize and return to their original existence as nations, the nations no longer exist, nor, we believe, will they ever exist again. And since there must be nations for revolutionary nationalism or internationalism to make sense, we decided that we would have to call ourselves something new. We say that the world today is a dispersed collection of communities. A community is different from a nation. A community is a small unit with a comprehensive collection of institutions that exist to serve a small group of people. And we say further that the struggle in the world today is between the small circle that administers and profits from the empire of the United States and the peoples of the world who want to determine their own destinies. We call this situation intercommunalism. We are now in the age of reactionary intercommunalism, in which a ruling circle, a small group of people, control all other people by using their technology. At the same time, we say that this technology can solve most of the material contradictions people face, that the material conditions exist that would allow the people of the world to develop a culture that is essentially human and would nurture these things that would allow the people to resolve contradictions in a way that would not cause the mutual slaughter of all of us. The development of such a culture would be revolutionary intercommunalism. Some communities have begun doing this. They liberated their territories and have established provisional governments. We recognize them and say that these governments represent the people of China, North Korea, the people in the liberated zones of South Vietnam, and the people in North Vietnam. We believe their examples should be followed so that the order of the day would not be reactionary intercommunalism empire, but revolutionary intercommunalism. The people of the world, that is, must seize power from the small ruling circle and expropriate the expropriators, pull them down from their pinnacle and make them equals, and distribute the fruits of our labor that have been denied us in some equitable way. We know that the machinery to accomplish these tasks exists, and we want access to it. Imperialism has laid the foundation for world communism, and imperialism itself has grown to the point of reactionary intercommunalism because the world is now integrated into one community. The communications revolution, combined with the expansive domination of the American empire, has created the global village. The peoples of all cultures are under siege by the same forces, and they all have access to the same technologies. There are only differences in degree between what's happening to the blacks here and what's happening to all the people in the world, including Africans. Their needs are the same and their energy is the same, and the contradictions they suffer will only be resolved when the people establish a revolutionary intercommunalism where they share all the wealth that they produce and live in one world. The stage of history is set for such a transformation. The technological and administrative base of socialism exists. When the people seize the means of production in all social institutions, then there will be a qualitative leap and a change in the organization of society. It will take time to resolve the contradictions of racism and all kinds of chauvinism. But because the people will control their own social institutions, they will be free to recreate themselves and to establish communism, a stage of human development in which human values will shape the structures of society. At this time, the world will be ready for a still higher level, of which we can now know nothing.